I never thought my own home would become a battleground. For 7 years, I had lived peacefully in the 4-bedroom house I purchased, long before meeting my wife Sophia. She used to praise my financial stability and responsibility. That all changed the night her entire family showed up, with 4 vehicles packed with belongings, claiming they had been evicted and needed a place to stay. While helping them unload, I overheard her father in the kitchen saying to her brothers, "He is too weak to stop us. Just watch him run away." The words cut deeper than any knife could. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you have ever had to stand up for yourself against people who underestimated you. And subscribe if you want more real stories about drawing boundaries with toxic family members and reclaiming your self-respect. I should start by telling you a bit about myself. My name is Anthony, and I am a 35-year-old structural engineer. My colleagues would describe me as the quiet, thoughtful type. I am not one for confrontation, preferring to solve problems methodically rather than emotionally. This approach has served me well in my career, where careful planning and attention to detail are essential. It might be why Sophia initially called me her steady rock when we first met. I purchased my home 8 years ago, well before meeting Sophia. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburban neighborhood with excellent schools and parks nearby. At the time, friends questioned why a single man needed such a large house, but I saw it as an investment in my future. I had plans to eventually start a family, and the neighborhood was perfect for raising children. Sophia entered my life like a burst of color on a gray canvas. We met when her interior design company was hired to redecorate our firm's office space. I remember watching her confidently direct her team, gesturing expressively as she explained her vision for the space. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, but a few strands escaped, framing her face as she worked. Something about her energy drew me in immediately. We started dating after I finally worked up the courage to ask her to coffee. Our relationship progressed quickly. Within a year, we were married in a small ceremony, attended by our closest friends and family. That was when I first noticed the stark difference between our families. Mine was small and fiercely independent. My parents, both retired teachers living in Arizona, had raised me to stand on my own 2 feet. They offered help when needed, but always encouraged self-reliance. In contrast, the Martinez family operated as a tight-knit collective. There were weekly family dinners, constant group texts, and an expectation that everyone would drop everything to help in a crisis. At first, I admired their closeness. It seemed warm and supportive, especially compared to my more reserved family dynamic. But small warning signs began appearing during our first year of marriage. Sophia would spend hours on the phone with her family every day, often becoming visibly stressed after these calls. When I asked what was wrong, she would mention her parents struggling to pay rent or her brother needing money for car repairs. The first time they asked for financial help, it was a relatively small amount. Her younger brother needed $500 to fix his car so he could get to work. I agreed without hesitation. The second time, it was $1,500 for her parents to cover rent when her father temporarily lost his job. Again, I wrote the check, though I noticed no one mentioned repayment. As these requests became more frequent, I began feeling uncomfortable but struggled to express it. Whenever I suggested that maybe her siblings could find better-paying jobs or her parents could downsize their apartment, Sophia would become defensive. "That is not how family works, Anthony," she would say. "When someone needs help, you help them. No questions asked." Over time, I noticed another troubling pattern. Sophia began speaking to me differently when her family was around. The respect and affection that characterized our private interactions diminished in their presence. She would roll her eyes when I spoke, interrupt me, or make small jokes at my expense. When I mentioned this behavior later, she would dismiss my concerns. "I am just having fun with my family," she would say. "You need to lighten up." I tried to be understanding. I told myself that family dynamics are complex, that this was simply their way of relating to each other. But deep down, I knew something was off balance in our relationship. I just had no idea how dramatically that imbalance would manifest. Everything changed on a Thursday evening in October. I had just arrived home from work when 4 vehicles pulled into our driveway. I recognized them immediately. Sophia's parents' old Buick, her older brother Marco's pickup truck, her younger brother Diego's sedan, and her sister Lucia's minivan. All 4 vehicles were packed to the brim with furniture boxes and bags. Sophia met me at the door before I could even get inside her expression, a mixture of anxiety and forced cheerfulness. "My family needs to stay with us for a while," she blurted out. "Their landlord evicted them because they have not paid rent in 3 months. They had nowhere else to go." I stood dumbfounded as her entire family began unloading their possessions onto our lawn. Not just her parents, but both brothers, her sister's husband, and their 2 children. 9 people in total, all apparently planning to move into our home. "How long is a while?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the growing knot in my stomach. "Just until they find a new place," Sophia replied vaguely, already turning to help her father with a heavy box. I followed her outside, where the family was efficiently creating a human chain to move their belongings toward the front door. No one stopped to greet me or ask permission. They moved with the confidence of people who had already decided this was happening regardless of my opinion. "We need to talk about this," I said, touching Sophia's arm to get her attention. "We cannot fit 11 people in this house indefinitely." Her father Roberto overheard and laughed. "Do not worry, son. We will not be in your way. We are family now, remember?" His tone was friendly, but something in his eyes made me uncomfortable. Before I could respond, Sophia pulled me aside. "They just need a few days to figure things out," she insisted, though her eyes would not meet mine. "Please, Anthony, they have nowhere else to go." Reluctantly, I helped bring in some of their belongings, still trying to process what was happening. As the boxes and furniture piled up in our living room, I overheard Sophia's brothers discussing sleeping arrangements. "I will take the guest room downstairs," Marco declared. "The kids can sleep in the office," Lucia added, as if these decisions had already been made. When I suggested that perhaps some family members could stay with other relatives or friends to avoid overcrowding, I was met with dismissive waves and assertions that keeping the family together was most important. Sophia's mother Elena patted my cheek condescendingly. "You are so kind to welcome us all, Anthony. We always said Sophia married a good man." That evening, as everyone settled in claiming spaces throughout the house, I retreated to the kitchen to collect my thoughts. Our home felt suddenly foreign, filled with loud voices and unfamiliar energy. Through the kitchen door I could hear Roberto talking to Marco and Diego in the dining room, unaware that I was just a few feet away. "He is too weak to stop us," Roberto said, his voice low but clear. "Just watch him run away when things get uncomfortable. Men like him always do." "Sophia says he always wants everyone to be happy," Marco replied with a chuckle. "He will never ask us to leave." I froze the glass of water in my hand, suddenly heavy. Then Sophia's voice joined the conversation. "Anthony will be fine with it," she assured them. "He knows how important family is to me." I set the glass down silently, my hand trembling slightly. The betrayal cut deep, not just because they were taking advantage of me, but because my own wife was complicit. She knew they were manipulating the situation and supported it. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I had always prided myself on being reasonable, patient, and accommodating. But as I stood there listening to them laugh about my perceived weakness, I realized that these qualities were being exploited rather than appreciated. Without a word to anyone, I went upstairs, packed a small overnight bag, and slipped out the back door to my car. No dramatic confrontation, no angry words, just a quiet exit that none of them even noticed. As I drove away from my own home, their words echoed in my mind, "Too weak to stop us. Just watch him run away." They had no idea what they had just set in motion. I checked into a hotel about 20 minutes from my house, a mid-range place with decent Wi-Fi and a small desk where I could work. The first call I made was not to Sophia, but to my friend James, a real estate attorney I had known since college. He agreed to meet me for breakfast the following morning. Over coffee and eggs, I explained the situation. James listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Let me get this straight," he said when I finished. "Your in-laws moved their entire extended family into your house without proper discussion or agreement, and when you expressed hesitation, they mocked you behind your back. And my wife was part of it," I added quietly. James nodded thoughtfully. "The good news is, legally speaking, you have a very strong position here. You purchased the house before your marriage, correct? I confirmed this was true. The house was solely in my name, purchased 5 years before I met Sophia. We had discussed adding her to the deed after our wedding, but never got around to completing the paperwork." "Then they are essentially trespassers," James explained. "You have every right to determine who lives in your home. If you want them out, we can make that happen." He outlined the concept of unlawful detainer and explained my rights as the property owner. We discussed various approaches from formal written notices to potential court orders, if necessary. By the end of breakfast, I had a clear 3-step plan: formal notification, a reasonable time frame for compliance, and legal enforcement if needed. While James began drafting the necessary documents, I turned my attention to my marriage. Sophia had called and texted multiple times since I left, but her messages were more accusatory than concerned. "Where did you go? Why did you just leave without saying anything? My family is asking where you are. This is embarrassing. You are being childish. Call me back." Not once did she ask if I was okay, or acknowledge that the situation might be difficult for me. It was as if my feelings and boundaries were completely irrelevant compared to her family's needs. I saved all these messages as documentation, something James had advised. I also began preparing divorce papers, though I had not fully committed to that path yet. The revelation that Sophia would so easily dismiss my feelings and comfort in my own home had shaken the foundation of our marriage. That afternoon I contacted a property management company I had worked with professionally and arranged for them to assess any potential damages to the house once the situation was resolved. I also researched private security firms, knowing that the removal of 9 reluctant adults might not go smoothly. By evening, James had prepared the legal notices. They stated clearly that all individuals not named on the deed had 48 hours to vacate the premises, with the exception of Sophia as my legal spouse. The documents emphasized that this was not a formal eviction, as they were not legal tenants, but rather a courtesy notice before law enforcement would be contacted regarding trespassing. I spent that night reviewing everything, making sure each step was legally sound. Part of me still hoped that once they realized I was serious, they would leave peacefully. But another part, the part that had heard them mock my perceived weakness, knew this would not be resolved easily. The next morning, James personally delivered the notices to my house. I stayed away, not wanting to get drawn into an emotional confrontation that might undermine the legal process. James called me afterward. "They did not take it well," he reported. "Your father-in-law actually laughed and threw the notice in the trash. Your wife seemed shocked, though. I think she did not expect you to take this route." Within an hour, Sophia called, her tone completely different from her previous messages. "Anthony, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice wavering between anger and fear. "You cannot just kick my family out." "Where will they go?" "The same place they were planning to go before they decided to move into our house without discussion." I replied evenly. "I am not responsible for housing your entire extended family indefinitely." "I did not think you would react this way," she said. "You need to calm down and come home so we can talk about this rationally." "I am perfectly calm," I told her, "and that is my home. I will not return until everyone except you has left." She began crying then, something that would have immediately softened me in the past. But the memory of her laughing with her family about my supposed weakness kept me firm in my resolve. 48 hours, Sophia. That is more than generous. I ended the call and turned my attention to the next phase of the plan. The following 72 hours tested my resolve like nothing before in my life. As James predicted, the formal notice alone did not motivate Sophia's family to leave. They seemed to believe it was an empty threat, or that Sophia would be able to change my mind. On the first day after serving the notice, I contacted the security company I had researched and arranged for 2 uniformed guards to be stationed outside my house, beginning the following evening when the 48-hour notice period would expire. Their presence was meant to be a visual reminder that this was not a bluff. When Sophia saw the security vehicle parked across the street, she called immediately, her voice pitched with panic. "There are security guards outside our house." "What are you doing?" "The neighbors are going to talk." "The notice period expires tonight," I reminded her calmly. "If your family has not left by then, they will be considered trespassers, and the guards are there to ensure a smooth transition when law enforcement arrives." "You cannot do this to me," she cried. "To my family, I am not doing anything to you, Sophia. You are welcome to stay. This is about the others who moved in without permission and have refused to leave when asked. They have nowhere to go. That is not my problem to solve." I ended the call despite her continued protests. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, hearing the distress in her voice, but remembering the casual cruelty with which she and her family had dismissed my feelings and boundaries. By the second day, Roberto finally called me directly, his tone significantly more subdued than the confident mockery I had overheard days earlier. "Anthony, son, perhaps we got off on the wrong foot," he began. "We should talk man to man about this situation." "There is nothing to discuss," I replied. "The notice was very clear." "But these are difficult times," he insisted. "Surely you would not put your wife's family out on the street. What kind of man would do such a thing?" The manipulation was so transparent, it almost made me laugh. "The kind of man who apparently is not too weak to stop you after all," I answered, referencing his own words before ending the call. Marco tried a different approach, showing up at my office building later that afternoon. Security prevented him from reaching my floor, but they called up to inform me he was there. I declined to meet with him and asked them to escort him from the property. By the evening of the second day, Sophia tried a new tactic, sending her coworker Lauren to my hotel. How she knew where I was staying, I do not know, but Lauren approached me in the hotel restaurant with a message that Sophia was completely devastated and willing to compromise. When I asked what compromise meant, Lauren admitted it involved the family staying just a few more weeks until they found alternative housing. I declined the offer and politely asked Lauren to leave. This was not a negotiation, and using third parties to pressure me only reinforced my determination. On the morning of the third day, exactly 72 hours after I had left my house, I met James and 2 police officers at my home. We had obtained an emergency court order emphasizing that these were not tenants with rights, but unauthorized occupants of a private residence. The officers reviewed the documentation and agreed to assist with removal if necessary. What followed was a scene I never imagined would play out in my life. As we approached the front door, Sophia answered, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Behind her, the entire family was gathered in the living room, their belongings still scattered throughout the house. None of them had packed anything. "Please do not do this," Sophia begged, as the officers explained the situation. "We can work this out." Roberto stepped forward, suddenly conciliatory. "Anthony, we apologize if we overstepped. Let us discuss this like family." The time for discussion was before you moved in, not after you refused to leave when asked. I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Officers, please proceed." What had been planned as an orderly removal quickly descended into chaos. Lucia's children began crying. Elena dramatically collapsed onto the sofa, claiming chest pains, until the officers mentioned that an ambulance would mean a trip to the hospital, not an excuse to stay in the house. Diego and Marco became verbally aggressive, requiring the officers to threaten them with obstruction charges. Through it all, Sophia alternated between pleading with me and berating me her emotions, whipsawing from one extreme to another. "How could you do this to me? To us?" she cried at one point, gripping my arm desperately. I looked her directly in the eyes and repeated the words I had overheard 3 days earlier. "I am just too weak to handle this situation, right? Just running away, as predicted." The color drained from her face as she realized I had heard their conversation that night. She had no response. One by one, the family members were escorted outside, where their vehicles still sat in the driveway and on the street. The officers supervised as they began loading their belongings, a process that took several hours and required multiple trips. Sophia stood on the front lawn, watching in disbelief as her family was forced to leave. When only Sophia remained, I turned to her. "You have a decision to make. You can stay as this is legally your residence too, or you can go with your family. But understand that our marriage is over either way." "You cannot mean that," she whispered. "We can fix this." "Some things cannot be fixed, Sophia. Trust is one of them." She left with her family, taking only a suitcase of personal belongings and promising to return for the rest of her things. As I watched them drive away, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for what had been lost and a quiet resolve about what must come next. In the days that followed, the consequences of my actions rippled outward. I had the locks changed immediately and arranged for a professional cleaning company to assess the house. The damage was considerable: food stains on carpets, marks on walls, broken fixtures, and a pervasive odor of too many people in too small a space. My phone became a constant source of intrusion. Sophia called and texted relentlessly, her messages evolving from angry accusations to tearful apologies. Her parents called from different numbers when I blocked theirs. Marco and Diego left threatening voicemails that I saved as evidence in case legal protection became necessary. Roberto called 5 days after the removal, his voice stripped of the authority it once carried. "Anthony, we have nowhere to go," he admitted. "The shelters are full. Elena and I are staying in our car. The children are separated between friends. Please reconsider just for a short time." I remained firm. "I recommend contacting social services for emergency housing assistance." Lucia's husband called next, distancing himself from the family's actions. "I told them this was a bad idea from the start," he claimed. "Now my kids are sleeping on a friend's floor because of their pride." Sophia attempted to use mutual friends as intermediaries, sending Lauren and another co-worker, Michael, to plead her case. "She really loves you," Michael insisted over coffee. "She made a terrible mistake." "It was not a mistake," I corrected him. "A mistake is accidental." This was a deliberate choice to disrespect me in my own home. The most unexpected contact came from Sophia's youngest sister, Maria, who had not been part of the group that moved in. She sent a simple text. "I am sorry for what my family did to you. You deserved better." When I agreed to meet her for lunch, she revealed that this was not the first time her family had taken advantage of someone's generosity. "They did the same thing to my aunt 3 years ago," she confided. "And before that they lived with my cousin until he finally changed the locks. They never learn because someone always rescues them." Her honesty was refreshing, and for the first time since the ordeal began, I felt validated in my decision to stand firm. During this period, I joined a support group for people going through difficult divorces. The stories I heard there helped me realize that my situation, while painful, was not unique. Many others had discovered unexpected strength when pushed to their limits by toxic relationships. As the weeks passed, I gradually reclaimed my sense of self. The house was repaired and deep cleaned. Sophia eventually collected her personal belongings while I was at work, supervised by James, to ensure nothing else was taken. The divorce proceedings moved forward, with Sophia ultimately agreeing to an uncontested separation when James presented evidence of her family's behavior. 3 months after that fateful night, I made the difficult decision to sell the house. Despite the repairs, it no longer felt like home. Too many negative memories lingered in those rooms. The sale went quickly in the hot market, and I purchased a smaller but newer townhouse in a different neighborhood. The process of moving forced me to evaluate what truly mattered in my life. Many possessions that had seemed important now felt like unnecessary baggage. I donated furniture, clothes, and household items, simplifying my life in ways that proved surprisingly liberating. 6 months after the night I overheard those fateful words, my divorce was finalized. The house had been sold, and I had settled into my new home. Through mutual friends, I heard that Sophia's family had eventually dispersed, with her parents moving in with a distant relative in another state, and her siblings finding various living arrangements of their own. Sophia made one final attempt to reconcile, showing up at my new place, unannounced. She looked thinner, tired, but had composed herself with the dignity I remembered from our early days together. "I know you probably hate me," she began, "and I deserve that. But I want you to know that I understand now what I did wrong. My family took advantage of your kindness and I chose them over you. I am so sorry." I invited her in for coffee, not out of any desire to reconcile, but because I wanted closure without anger. We talked for an hour about what had happened and why. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, she truly listened. "My father always taught us that family comes first, no matter what," she explained. "I never questioned it until I lost you. Now I see how they use that loyalty to avoid responsibility." Before she left, she asked if we might try again someday. I was honest with her. "Some lessons change us permanently, Sophia. I am not the same person who allowed himself to be pushed around out of fear of conflict. And I cannot go back to being that person even for you." She nodded, accepting this truth with a sadness that seemed genuine. As I closed the door behind her, I felt the final weight of that chapter in my life lift from my shoulders. The experience taught me that sometimes what others perceive as weakness is actually restraint. My tendency to avoid confrontation was not a character flaw, but a preference for peace. However, when that preference was exploited, I discovered a capacity for decisive action I had not known I possessed. I also learned the crucial difference between helping others and enabling destructive patterns. True kindness sometimes means establishing firm boundaries, even when doing so is painful. These days I am rebuilding my life, one careful decision at a time. My work continues to provide satisfaction, and I have slowly resumed dating, though, with a much clearer sense of my own boundaries and expectations. The quiet strength I discovered during those 72 hours has become a core part of my identity, not as a weapon, but as a shield. Sometimes walking away is not a sign of weakness, but the first step toward reclaiming your power. What boundaries have you had to establish that others mistook for weakness? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real stories about finding strength in unexpected places. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video with them. Thank you for listening, and remember that true strength often lies in knowing when to stand your ground, not in avoiding conflict at all costs.